2. And today we would like to give this subject consideration, the connecting point or God's point of connection. We want to look at what it is and how we can take care of it so that the connection works well. As we were setting up for this PowerPoint, we had a bad connection. And what was happening? The screen was coming on and off, and there was not proper communication between what was on the computer and what was up on the screen. So God has also a point of connection with each and every one of us, and it is actually a very specific single cell of our body. And if we want this connection to be functional, if we want this connection to operate well, because do you think a connection with God is important? I mean, it is vital. It's what it's all about. Salvation is a matter of having a proper, healthy, functioning connection with heaven and with God. So this connection point is very, very crucial. We want to make sure this connection is working well. You're actually looking at that cell right now. The cell we're talking about is the neuron. Each and every one of us have neurons. They are those structures in our brain that connect to everything. Let's see what the Spirit of Prophecy says on this subject. The brain nerves, which communicate with the entire system, are the only medium through which heaven can communicate to man. What is the only medium through which heaven can communicate to man? The brain nerves. And the brain nerves are neurons. Whatever disturbs the circulation of the electric currents in the nervous system lessens the strength of the vital powers and the results of a deadening and of the sensibilities of the mind. So whatever disturbs the circulation, whatever disturbs the connection, results in something deadening of the sensibilities of our minds. So this neuron, this one cell in our body is made up of many, many cells. But this one cell is the cell through which heaven or God communicates to man. The neuron. And it's the only thing. He doesn't connect with our finger. He doesn't connect with our ears. He doesn't connect with our eyes. Yes, we hear, we see, all these things. But the connection is neuronal. So whatever disturbs that is going to have a serious impact. So we want to look at a little bit how it works and how can we take better care of it. What are some of the things that may cause disturbance there? So your brain is amazing. If you look at the numbers, there's all kinds of different numbers. Some say the neurons in the brain equate to all the stars in the Milky Way, right? So some, numberless, but other figures are a little bit more conservative. About 86 billion interconnected neurons in the brain. That's a lot. And these neurons are operating electrically. It was interesting, Ellen White used that word electrical, and we're going to come back to that again because she is actually speaking on a level way ahead of her time when she made that statement. So the brain runs on only about 25 watts of electricity, enough to kind of light up a little LED light. And there are many, many different kinds of neurons. Now, when we are born with a number of neurons. All of the rest of the cells of our body have a certain life. Some live 120 days, other cells maybe a month, others 6 months. They have a different lifespan, but did you know the neuron lives from birth till death? It lives your entire lifetime, unlike many other brain cells. Actually, they've done studies on it, and they found that the neuron could live much longer than most people's lifespan. They've taken neurons out of mice and put them into rats that live 3-4 times longer than the mouse lives, and they find that these neurons can live 3, 4, 5 times the length of the species from which they were taken. So the connecting point in our brain, God designed it in a manner that it could live hundreds of years. And we see that. In the beginning, mankind lived many, many hundreds of years. Now, in more recent times, the concept of neurogenesis is coming forth, to where there is thought by many neuroscientists that actually some new brain cells, some new neurons can be formed as we go through life. And they're formed here in the hippocampus, that little area that is flashing on your screen there. The hippocampus forms these brain cells, these neurons, and an interesting phenomenon takes place. These neurons actually migrate through the brain to the area where they're going to serve. And it's an interesting concept. Not all neuroscientists have accepted this. But there is thought that there can be some neurogenesis, some new neurons formed. And so what happens with a neuron? We have some sensory input, things that we see, things that we hear. Then those things come into our short-term memory here. And in terms of remembering them, they have to be encoded. If what we see, what we hear, what the neuron connects to is not encoded, guess what happens? We forget it and we lose it in less than a minute. It's gone. It came and it went. Important point, especially in light of the lesson we had this morning about taking a thought and dwelling on it so long until it becomes my own. What is the process that allows for this encoding? Rehearsal. There has to be some rehearsal to encode that thought. And when that thought is properly encoded, it can be retrieved. It can go then into our memory, and then it will hopefully not be forgotten. And you and I, who we are, is really what we think. What does Proverbs 23:7 say? For as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. What you are thinking is who you are. What your neuron is firing, those electrical currents in your neurons, their circuits, their activity, their functionality determines who you are. You see, you sow a thought, and what happens as a consequence of a thought? An action. Every action comes from a thought. And then you repeat an action, what results? Habits. Our repeated actions become our habits. And as we habituate certain actions, what do those result in? The formation of character. So think about this little cell that you saw on the screen at the beginning. That little spider-like cell. What it is doing determines what you are becoming and determines who you are. Who you are. Now, this is a little bit again on learning. It's so important for learning to pay attention. Without attention, those neurons cannot rehearse. They cannot encode. And when there's no encoding, there is no retrieval. This is so important in learning. It's interesting when you stand up front, whether you're a Sabbath school teacher or whatever, you can look out and you can see what people are doing. You can see what they're doing. You see what's happening, how things are functioning. And you can see, first of all, what is the first thing you can tell? And you can tell that when you're a teacher, and we have here persons who have been teachers for a long time. You can tell if people are paying attention. If they're not paying attention, there is no encoding. When there's no encoding, there can be no retrieval. Are we paying attention to God? Is our neuronal connection with heaven intact? Is there encoding and retrieval taking place in regards to what God is communicating to you and me? What are we paying attention to? What we are paying attention to is determining what we are thinking. And what we are thinking and encoding and rehearsing is what we are becoming. And that takes us back to the Bible verse, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Therefore, this Bible text in 1 Peter 1 is important. We are to gird up the loins of our mind. What does that say? Have some checks and balances in regards to what you're paying attention to. Gird it up. Be sober and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. May God help us. May God help us preserve that neuron in such a manner that it's to God's honor and glory. Let's take another look at it. Look at this neuron. This is what God made. This is the connection point between heaven and earth. The only thing. Here's the cell body. It's got all these little fingers coming out from it. These are called dendrites. And each neuron has, some of them hundreds, and some of them have thousands of these little fingers extending out from the cell body. What are they all doing? They're attaching. They're connecting. They're getting information, and then they're passing it on. See how the arrow points this way? The information comes from here, then it goes down to the axon terminal. This is how it works. Thousands of connections, hundreds of connections, interconnecting. And so the thought process, that the memory, is nothing more than an electrical circuit. It's a complex circuit. Let's look a little more how this is. Here we see the neuron. See all these little fingers, and then we see other structures around it. See, we have astrocytes, and we have oligodendrocytes and microglia. We have all of these little cells, and all of these neuronal cells are there for one purpose, and one purpose only. You know what they're there for? To serve the neuron. To take care of it. Let's just look at a few of them and see what they do. Look at this one here. The epidermal cells. They have all of these little fingers extending up here, and they're all waving around. You know what their job is? To clean up everything in the brain, to move the cerebral spinal fluid along, to get it to move as they're waving. It's kind of moving it along. To move along debris, to clean out the brain. Then we come down here and we see these guys. This looks like an octopus. It has all these hands and fingers. You know what its job is? Its job is to anchor the neuron, to hold it in place. So it's holding here and holding here to keep all of the structure functioning. Everything in that brain is there for the function of serving the neuron. And the neuron is what? The connecting point to God. The origin of thought. The seed of who and what you are. That's what this guy does. The astrocyte, right here. The oligodendrocytes, look at them. They have all of these little structures here, these myelin sheaths that they work with to affect transmission. Then we have the microglia. These are garbage disposals. Get rid of dead brain cells and bacteria and clean up things. I like these guys, these satellite cells. These look like bubble wrap. This is like popcorn in a UPS delivery. You buy something really special that's fragile, what do they do with it? They put all this popcorn in there and all these bubble wrap in order to protect it so it doesn't break. So it's well cushioned and taken care of. And look what God did. He put this in there for what purpose, do you think? To protect the connection, to protect the neuron. All of these cells are called neuroglia. Okay, they're all supportive cells. They're all structural cells that are not the neuron, but they're there to support. All of this has that wonderful purpose. And if you were to look at it histologically through a microscope, this is what it would look like. See, here you see the neuron. Here you see all of the neuroglia cells, all there to support and take care of it. Everything there. Now, your brain uses about 20% of your total body energy. 20%. It accounts for only 2% of your weight. So 2% of what you weigh takes up 20% of all your energy. An important cell. The cell that determines who you are and connects you to heaven. This equation, E equals mc squared, all of those that went to college know this is one of the most common equations, E equals mc squared from Einstein. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Wow. What did I say the neurons do? They're electrical circuits. It's all a matter of energy transmission. So based on this equation, when I looked at it, I thought of, wow, energy, electricity equals mass times the speed of light squared. What Bible verse do you think came to my mind? This Bible verse right here. Now, this Bible verse, I want to tell you, I'm not giving it an expositional analysis. This Bible verse, I'm not expounding to you theologically, but I'm using this Bible verse, not theologically, not expositionally, but I'm using it metaphorically. Here's the picture in the metaphor. Now, faith. What is faith? Faith is a thought. Faith is energy. Faith is an electrical current. When you have faith, what is happening? Your neurons are firing electrically. E equals mc squared. Faith is what? This is beautiful. Metaphorically, is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. When you understand how the neuron works, it gives substance. It gives substance to our faith. Now, let's look a little bit on the action potential, how this electricity works in the brain. Ellen White talked about it electrically, and truly she was correct. Look here how the neuron fires along its axon. It actually has an electrical charge which is minus 70 millivolts. That's what the charge is at resting. Now, when a thought comes through, when something is firing, when there's an electrical action potential, this is what happens. A lot of this is chemistry. Outside you have sodium, inside you have potassium, and they have electrical charges. And determining where they are, they cause certain things to be charged electrically. So the way the membrane works, it's negatively charged because of the sodium-potassium relationship. So when it depolarizes, sodium comes in, potassium goes out, and the charge reverses, and electrical current is in action. Here we see it. It depolarizes. And then the body, in order to reset the switch, has what is called the sodium pump. It pumps the sodium back out, and the potassium comes back in, and now it's ready to fire again. That's how it reloads. Electrical action. minus 70 millivolts. It goes down to 0 and actually goes up to plus 30 when the membrane repolarizes. Now, let me come back again to this Bible text. The brain nerves, which communicate with the entire system, are the only medium through which heaven can communicate to man and affect his inmost life. Whatever disturbs the circulation of the electric current in the nervous system lessens the strength of the vital powers. When did Ellen White write that? Let me go back to this slide again. When was electricity invented and by whom? Generally, Benjamin Franklin, 1752. What about Thomas Edison? 1882. Lights for the first time were brought into a circuit in Manhattan in 1882. When did Ellen White write this statement? Testimony Volume 2, page 871, was published 11 years before Thomas Edison brought the electric service to Manhattan. Ellen White was talking about the electrical activities of the brain. Is that amazing how Ellen White was ahead of her time? In neuroscience, in everything. And telling us to be very careful about this electrical current. So communing with God and God communing with man is actually an electrical current, an energy surge. Let's look a little bit more how this works, the action potential. The way a nerve works, you have to reach a certain threshold. Okay, it's not a dimmer, it's a switch. You have to reach a certain threshold of input before the pulse action takes place, and that's here how it's demonstrated. Once that threshold is reached, boom, the nerve fires. There it goes, and then it has a refractory period. That's exactly how it works on a threshold basis. It has to have a certain amount of input before it can fire. Now, we talked about the electrical impulse going through the neuron. Now when it gets to the end, remember that's the opposite end of all the little fingers where the dendrites were. There we have a synapse, we have a connection. A connection with what? With other nerves. Because our thoughts and our memories are circuits. Okay? This connects with that, connects with this, connects with that. You know, memory is an incredible phenomenon of connections that are functional, and in order to be able to retrieve that memory, you have to run that circuit again. That entire circuit. Now, let's look at the complexity of how wonderfully God made this. Here comes the electrical charge down the axon. Then as you get to the synapse, it becomes, from electrical, it becomes chemical. The transmission becomes chemical. And calcium right here is that messenger that goes to these vesicles that create neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters are chemical elements that carry the electrical message from this neuron to this neuron. Do you see how complicated all of this is? And how important, if we want to remember things, we have to rehearse them. We have to establish a circuit that is rehearsed and used frequently. Again, coming to the lesson, dwelling on a thought so long until it becomes our own. What does that mean? When the circuit of God's thought becomes the circuitry of your own thought. That's what the Bible talks about when it says, let this mind be in you, which was in Christ Jesus. When you have the circuitry, the thinking, and then you have the doing. And then you will result in having the character of Jesus Christ. So developing Christ-like character is a function of what? If you want to take it down to the unit level, is a function of thought processes. In order to have the character of Christ, you have to have the neuronal thought processes of Christ with the circuitry functioning in that manner that develops that character. And you know, there are many, many neurotransmitters. See, here they are. They're created in these vesicles. Then these neurotransmitters are released into the synapse, into this space. As they come into the space, now they have receptors that they attach to. And as they attach to the receptor, you know what it's like? It's like putting a key into a lock. It fits right in there. Then it turns it, opens it, and now the thought. Look at all the different types of neurotransmitters. You know these: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, adrenaline, acetylcholine, and glutamate. That's the most common neurotransmitter in the body, glutamate. Now, let's look real quick a little bit at the circulation. Why am I sharing this with you? I want to share with you God's intentionality, His deliberate design of the human brain, that it may be developed and function perfectly. Look, circulation is so important. Remember, she says anything that disturbs is harmful. Here's the circulation of the brain. We've got the vertebral arteries, one on each side going up, and it's interesting that God designed it. There's no other organs that I'm aware of that He made like this, where He's got a roundabout. Here's a circle of Willis. This roundabout, why did He make this like this? So that if there is any occlusion or obstruction to blood flow, blood has more than one way to get there. See, if it's blocked over here, if something's blocking over here and it can't go up this way, then guess what? It can come around this way and still go up that way. Okay? He built in redundancy. He built in a certain level of bypass ability. So you've got the vertebral arteries and you've got two carotid arteries. You've got four blood vessels going up into the brain. Look what Ellen White says about this. A calm, clear brain and steady nerves are dependent upon well-balanced circulation of the blood. Sometimes I wonder why people there's not more clarity. Steady nerves, not more well-balanced brain. Maybe the circulation is messed up by the way they live, their habits. You know, atherosclerotic disease can also affect brain circulation. And when we have things that don't allow the brains to be nourished properly, then the brain cannot be clear, cannot perceive. One of the major reasons for dementia in older ages, guess what? Impaired circulation to the brain. One of the major factors, and that's why one of the best things that older people can do if they want to have positive effects on senile dementia is to help me exercise. Because what does exercise do? Stimulates circulation. Major impact on senile dementia. Just exercise more. Now, let's look at how this works. This is, again, really amazing. Here we're looking at the brain tissue on the bottom. This would be the skull on the top. Here you have all of the different layers underneath the bone. Look at here. You have this whole protective area. You've got cerebral spinal fluid. Your brain is like in a waterbed, wrap, okay? All of this water cushion to protect the brain. And here we have, you remember we looked at those cells that are moving the cerebral spinal fluid. They're flushing through there. Now the brain has a glymphatic, which is like the lymphatic system in your body. It runs fluid all through here. and it cleans out things, and then it runs things down into the lymphatic system, and then from the lymphatic system, it's all tied into the lymphatics, and it drains out all of the material that is resulting from disease, destruction, or whatever is damaging the cell tissues. Now let's look at how this breakdown works. What is interesting is cerebral spinal fluid is about 50 mils produced per day. That's a half a liter. So it's like washing the brain all the time. Again, for what purpose? To keep it clean, to have a good connection. A good connection. So it starts back here. There's autophagy, which is self-eating, cells destroying to recycle them, okay? And then actually it moves it forward into the lymphatics and then out of the lymphatics. What's interesting is the University of Rochester, New York, discovered that this system works primarily when do you think? At night. This works primarily at night. And when would you guess, if you were to take a wild guess, when would you guess that this works at night? The first part of the night, before 12 o'clock. Look at this statement from Ellen White. I know from the testimonies given me, so Ellen White didn't make this up. She was told, and how many? From time to time, for brain workers, that sleep is worth far more when? Before than after midnight. Do you think she knew about this cleaning? 2 hours of good sleep before 12 o'clock is worth more than 4 hours after 12 o'clock. Friends, if you want to take care of your neuron, go to bed on time. Don't turn the night into day and day into night. Go to bed early and on time, and maybe better get up earlier. We want our brains to be clear. We want our neurons to function. And anything that is going to be strong needs exercise. If we want to develop our muscles, what do? We need to exercise. What about the brain? I'd like to suggest we need to exercise those neurons. Exercise. Do neuronal push-ups. Do neuronal sit-ups. Whatever. But exercise them. Jog your neurons. You know, if you don't use it, you lose it. And part of aging, they have found that for people as they're getting older, number one, keep the circulation up, and number two is exercise the brain. If we let our brains just kind of go, what happens? Dementia sets in much sooner. Of course, I'm not talking about it from a pathological like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, but from an aging process. So we want to exercise our brains. This is the kind of exercise your brain needs. So this week, I want to challenge each and every one of us to exercise the neuron, which is, what did we say? God's connecting point. Here's how you can exercise the neuron. Finally, brethren, Philippians 4:8. There are 8 things listed here to do. See, sit-ups, push-ups, chin-ups, get it? Treadmill, boom, 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 8 things. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true. This Bible verse always hits me. There's so much that we think about that's not true. That's not brain exercise. Whatsoever things are true. What's number 2? Whatsoever things are honest. There's so much dishonesty in our world today. Yes, people are exercising their brain, but they're exercising them with falsehood, with dishonesty, with all of the other things. Is that developing a healthy neuron? Is that developing the mind of Christ? Tell me, is it? Is that the mind of Christ? No. First of all, number one, is it true? Number two, is it honest? Number three, is it just? Number four, pure. 5, lovely. Good report. Virtue, praise, do what? Think on these things. We're living in a terrible time where there's so much distraction for thinking on everything and anything except this. Would you agree? So I challenge you to make a commitment today, during this service, that from this time on, you're going to take care of that neuron and exercise it in a manner that is to God's honor and glory, and that will result in the development of a godlike character. I struggle with this. There's a thought comes in, but it's not true. Hey, forget that circuit. I'm not going to encode it. I'm not going to retrieve it. And so I'm not going to remember it. True? Yes. Honest, just, pure, good report, virtue, praise. Do that. Do that. Another thing that is so special about the brain, how God made it. The circulation to the brain is like no other. The blood vessels that go to the brain are like no other blood vessels in the body. They have a blood-brain barrier. They're designed in a way because they have decreased permeability. So what's inside the blood vessel cannot get out to the brain. To the other cells in the body, they are more permeable. So what's inside the blood vessel can permeate out. But in the brain, they are more impermeable, and that's what is the blood-brain barrier. What is it there for? They want to protect the brain from anything that might contaminate it, poison it, affect it in a negative manner. And remember we talked about the astrocytes? You can see them here. These are the astrocytes. They wrap around those blood vessels and they decrease the permeability, so what's on the inside cannot come out to the outside, to the brain. And in that way, they can be selective in allowing whatever substances they want to come from the blood vessel out to the brain. Selective. Amazing. So the blood-brain barrier allows the passage of water, some gases, lipid-soluble molecules, and a few other things, and that's it. It doesn't allow other things. And this is how it would look. If you would look at the membrane on the side, here you see very tight connections. And there's like gatekeepers in there. They don't allow what's inside to come outside. On a cross-sectional view, here you see the astrocytes. They're all wrapped around the blood vessel, making sure. God wanted to make sure that that precious neuron is not exposed to anything that could harm it. This is by design. Our brains need cleansing. God help us. That's what Jeremiah says. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Why has Christ not come? Christ object lesson. When? There's going to be a when, then. Christ will come when something takes place. When the character of Christ is perfectly reproduced in his people, then he will come to claim his own. Oh, friends, it's a neuronal problem. When the neuron can function in the way God designs it to, by being connected with heaven, when a character can be formed by exercising the brain on those 8 things that I mentioned, and the Bible is full of more other things, when that can be developed, the true, the pure, the good, the lovely, the good report, things with virtue and praise, when we can think on these things, then we will have what? A perfectly reproduced character like Christ. And then Jesus will come. Are you going to go home this week and practice some neuronal hygiene? I hope so. Another thing that is so important. Regularity in eating is very important. Might I suggest regularity in everything in life is important. We live in a time where, you know what, people just do whatever they feel like whenever they feel like it. There is no regularity. There's no respect for the biorhythmic clock of the body. Everything is backwards and forwards. Look at, she talks here about regularity in eating, but it's regularity in everything. We need to be creatures of habit. There's a time for this, and then what? Then there's a time for this, and then what? And then there's a time for this, and for everything there is what? A time under the sun. For everything. Regularity in eating is very important to a healthy body. And I highlighted this word, serenity of the mind. You know what? This is lacking in our world today. There is no mental, functional, neuronal serenity in our world. People are reflexive, abusive, impulsive. Serenity of the mind. What does serenity mean? Calm, controlled thinking of the mind. What is it based on? Regularity. May God help us. Here's a promise. If you feel hopeless, oh, there's so much to do. I can never get the mind of Christ. If you feel hopeless, this is a promise for you. Look what it says. If, read, you will do your part or our part, then what's going to happen? Then the Lord will do His part. Oh, friend, are you committed to do your part this week? That's all God is asking you to do. Do your part. Then He will do His part. And in case you think I took this statement out of context, look what it's talking to and reference in. Preserving our brain nerve powers. Do your part. Do your part. These statements here have been used multiple times in the last number of sermons. They're taken from This Day with God. And they show, we will not take the time to read them, that the things that we do have eternal, forever consequences. Forever consequences. Read this for yourself. Abusing, forever loss. Here's the second paragraph to that same statement. It's going to be forever lost. So may God help us to respect and understand this most important cell of our body, that we do what God designed us to do, to preserve it, to take care of it, so that we can have a proper connection with God. This is my wish and prayer. And I ask you to, this week, exercise your brain for Christ-like development. Amen.